Nestled among the rolling hills of northern Idaho sits the town of Moscow, a quiet, tree-lined college community that looks, at first glance, like a place untouched by darkness. Its streets wind past coffee shops, red brick buildings, and the University of Idaho campus, a historic blend of Gothic towers and modern dorms, where autumn always smells of pine and espresso. Students here study agriculture, art, criminology, and engineering. They jog along the Paradise Path, fill the small restaurants on Main Street, and cheer in gold and black for the Vandals on fall weekends. In November 2022, the leaves had already fallen. Thanksgiving break was just a week away. Finals loomed, but spirits were high. Four friends, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. It was a time of laughter, routine, and plans for the future. Their off-campus home at 1122 King Road sat on a quiet slope near the university's Greek Row, surrounded by student rentals. It was a familiar sight to anyone walking the area, a gray three-story house with string lights hanging on the deck and the glow of student life spilling from its windows. Kaylee and Madison were inseparable, best friends. Since middle school in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, they had grown up together, shared inside jokes, and come to college together. Kaylee was 21, bright, confident, the fifth of 5 siblings in a close, lively family. She was days away from graduating early and preparing to move to Austin, Texas, for a new tech job. Madison, 21 as well, was gentle and funny, majoring in marketing, full of plans and warmth. Their friendship was more like sisterhood, the kind built over years of sleepovers, shared secrets, and the easy shorthand of people who've grown up side by side. Xana Kernodle, 20, lived on the lower floor. She was a junior studying marketing and a member of the Pi Beta Phi sorority. She had an easy laugh, a sharp wit, and a deep loyalty to those around her. She was dating Ethan Chapin, a 20-year-old triplet who lived nearby with his brothers. Ethan was tall, athletic, and open-hearted, a student at the university majoring in recreation, sport, and tourism management. He and Xana had been together for about a year. Their friends described them as the couple that just fit. On weekends, they were rarely apart, neighbors. The house was lively but ordinary, a hub of young life, where music played softly from speakers and friends gathered before heading downtown. On weekdays, the sound of footsteps and laughter drifted from the balconies. It was the sort of student home that reminded people of the innocence of campus life, a bubble of safety where futures still felt guaranteed. The week leading up to Sunday, November 13th, 2022, was typical. The group studied, attended classes, made plans for Thanksgiving. Kaylee had returned to Moscow after spending time at home with her family. She'd wanted to show Madison her new Range Rover and introduce her to the dog she'd recently adopted, a golden labradoodle named Murphy. It was a casual weekend, nothing unusual. Dinner, friends, a football game, the usual rhythm of a college town on a Saturday night. That Saturday, November 12th, the University of Idaho campus buzzed with the energy of game day. The Vandals had hosted their rivals, and though it wasn't a major event, the bars and restaurants filled after sunset. Moscow's downtown district was small, a handful of bars clustered near Main Street, where students drifted between places like Corner Club and the Garden Lounge, laughing, posing for photos, and ordering late-night pizza slices from the food trucks parked nearby. By late evening, the temperature dropped below freezing, but no one seemed to mind. For Kaylee and Madison, the night was about nostalgia. They decided to head downtown together, leaving the King Road house around 10 p.m. Security cameras later captured them at a local bar, smiling and talking to friends. Around 1:30 a.m., they stopped by a food truck, a popular late-night spot called the Grub Truck, where they were seen on live-stream footage ordering pasta and chatting with other students. They appeared relaxed, unhurried, and safe. A man standing nearby was briefly labeled a person of interest online, but police quickly cleared him. Kaylee and Madison then got a ride home from a friend, returning to King Road just before 1:56 a.m. downstairs. Xana and Ethan had spent the night at a campus party hosted by one of Ethan's fraternities, Sigma Chi, only a short walk away. They left around 1:45 a.m. and returned to the house about 10 minutes later. 2 other roommates, both female, had gone out earlier in the evening and were asleep on the lower level of the home. It was, by all appearances, an ordinary Saturday turning into Sunday. The neighborhood fell quiet around 2 a.m. The glow of porch lights shimmered faintly against the frost. Cars passed occasionally on King Road, but nothing seemed out of place. At 2:26 a.m., Kaylee's phone activity ceased. Madison's ended soon after. At 4 a.m., a camera from a nearby residence recorded faint sounds, a dog barking, then a thud. A door opened and closed. The audio was faint, indistinct. It wouldn't be discovered until weeks later, at 11:58 a.m. on Sunday morning. A call was placed to 911 from inside the house, reporting an unconscious person. The caller was one of the surviving roommates. When officers arrived minutes later, the quiet street erupted into chaos. What they found inside the home would later be described as the most gruesome crime scene in the town's history. For young students, Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan were dead. Each had been stabbed multiple times in what appeared to be a targeted attack. 2 roommates had survived, unharmed but traumatized. Murphy, Kaylee's dog, was found alive in the home. The scene was brutal yet strange. There were no signs of forced entry, no items stolen, no obvious motive. The murder weapon, believed to be a large fixed-blade knife, was missing. The attack had occurred sometime between 4 o'clock and 4:25 a.m. Police quickly ruled out the surviving roommates and the man seen at the food truck. The case began as a mystery with almost no answers. Only shock and grief to by Monday morning. The small city of Moscow was unrecognizable. Reporters flooded the town. Helicopters hovered over the university's Greek Row. Police cars lined King Road. Students packed their bags and went home early, fearful and uncertain. The university canceled classes temporarily. Vigil candles appeared on the campus lawn, flickering against the November wind. The 4 victims' families arrived in town, each facing an unimaginable loss. Kaylee's parents, Steve and Kaylee Goncalves, drove through the night from Coeur d'Alene. Madison's father, Ben Mogen, a local business owner, said the moment he got the call, the world went silent. The Kernodle and Chapin families arrived from Washington State, holding on to each other, trying to understand what had happened. For all of them, the image of that bright house on King Road, once a place of laughter, had become something unspeakable. Investigators worked around the clock. The Idaho State Police, the FBI, and the Moscow Police Department formed a joint task force. They processed the scene meticulously, collecting DNA, fingerprints, and digital evidence. They interviewed neighbors, reviewed hours of security footage, and mapped the victims' movements from the night before. Hundreds of leads poured in. Yet for weeks, the case seemed frozen. No arrests, no suspects, no clear narrative. The public's anxiety turned to obsession. True crime forums erupted with theories. TikTok creators posted maps and timelines. Speculation spread faster than facts, adding confusion to grief. But inside the command center, detectives were quietly building something solid, a pattern hidden in data by late November. They had recovered surveillance footage showing a white Hyundai Elantra near the crime scene around 3:29 a.m., making several passes down King Road. The car became their focus. The driver was unidentified, but analysts from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit believed it could belong to the killer. The footage wasn't perfect, grainy, distant, caught in the glow of streetlights, but it was something. Investigators cross-checked it against vehicle registrations from nearby universities, gas stations, and highway cameras. The trail was faint, but it led somewhere, across state lines, into Washington. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the family struggled with the unbearable quiet. On December 1st, the University of Idaho held a candlelight vigil in the Kibbe Dome. Thousands attended. The lights were dimmed except for the soft glow of candles. On stage, the victims' families spoke, their voices trembling, hearts fractured but steady. Steve Goncalves looked out over the crowd and said, "These were good kids. They didn't deserve this. Someone out there knows who did it." The crowd stood in silence as he spoke, their candles trembling in the cold air. The 4 names, Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, became symbols of a generation's innocence shattered. Students wore bracelets engraved with their initials. Murals appeared around campus. Professors spoke quietly about safety and grief before resuming lectures. The house on King Road was cordoned off with police tape, its windows dark, its yard strewn with evidence markers. Reporters camped at its edge for days, then weeks, as snow began to fall again. Moscow had become a town of ghosts, of empty streets, sleepless nights, and questions that no one could yet answer. But hundreds of miles away, a team of investigators was narrowing the search. They were following a car, a phone signal, and a shadow that moved across state lines, a shadow that belonged to a man studying criminology. Fascinated by the psychology of murder, the story of who he was and how they found him was about to unfold. Midnight in Moscow, Idaho, came softly that Saturday. The university town lay half asleep under a crust of frost, its yellow streetlights cutting cones of mist over the empty sidewalks. In most student houses, the noise was tapering off, music fading, front doors clicking shut, laughter replaced by the mechanical hum of baseboard heaters. King Road, tucked against the hill behind campus, was no different. The three-story gray house at 1122 was glowing faintly through its windows, the pulse of a normal weekend night. Inside, Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen had just come home from downtown. They'd climbed the short wooden steps to the front door, the cold air following them inside, the scent of late-night food drifting up from the takeout containers they carried. They spoke in the shorthand of best friends, half-sentences, overlapping laughter. Kaylee had been teasing Madison about moving to Austin, about how they'd still FaceTime every day, how distance wouldn't kill the vibe. They kicked off their shoes, turned on soft music, and went upstairs to Madison's room. The house settled around them. Below, Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin returned from the Sigma Chi fraternity. It was about 1:45 a.m. They parked nearby, crossed the small yard, and slipped inside through the sliding glass door that opened onto the middle floor. Neighbors would later recall hearing nothing unusual, just a door, maybe laughter, then quiet again. Down on the lowest level, two other roommates were already asleep behind locked doors. Between 2 o'clock and 2:30 a.m., phones in the house pinged briefly. Texts, social media scrolls, fragments of digital life that would later help investigators map the timeline. Kaylee's dog Murphy barked once, then settled. At 2:26 a.m., Kaylee's phone activity stopped. Madison's ended seconds later. By 3 a.m., the house was dark. The forensic timeline built later by police would reconstruct the rest with clinical precision. Around 3:29 a.m., a surveillance camera on a neighboring home captured the headlights of a white Hyundai Elantra passing by King Road. The vehicle circled the area multiple times between 3:29 and 4:04 a.m., an unusual pattern for a neighborhood where traffic all but disappears after midnight. At 4:04 a.m., the same car was seen again, approaching from the east. At 4:12 a.m., it made another pass and disappeared from view at 4:17 a.m. A camera near the intersection of King and Queen Roads picked up faint audio, a dog barking, a thud, a female voice, indistinct, followed by more barking. Then silence. By 4:20 a.m., the Elantra was seen leaving the area at high speed, heading south. Within minutes, the house was still again. No one called for help. No neighbor reported screams. Whatever had happened inside 1122 King Road had lasted only a few minutes. The surviving roommates slept through the early morning. When one of them woke around 11 a.m., she noticed the house was unusually quiet. Kaylee's bedroom door was closed. Madison's too. She tried knocking. No answer. She called friends for help, thinking someone might have passed out. At 11:58 a.m., a 911 call was placed from one of the surviving roommates' phones, reporting an unconscious person. Several friends had by then arrived at the house, unaware of the horror inside. When officers from the Moscow Police Department entered minutes later, they encountered what Chief James Fry would later describe only as a scene we'll never forget. Inside were the bodies of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Each had suffered multiple stab wounds. Two were found on the upper floor, one in the hallway of the middle level, one in Xana's bedroom. The attack appeared to have been carried out with a large fixed-blade knife, later identified in filings as a Kabar-style combat knife. The victims showed no defensive wounds consistent with a long struggle, suggesting the assault was swift and targeted. The killer had entered quietly, left nothing of value missing, and vanished into the morning, within hours. The crime scene filled with personnel from every level of law enforcement: Moscow PD, Idaho State Police, and the FBI. Yellow tape sealed the house. Evidence markers lined the driveway. A mobile command unit parked nearby, its antenna rising into the cold November air. Inside the home, forensic teams photographed blood patterns, collected fibers, and dusted for prints. They noted an open sliding door on the middle floor and footprints near it. The dog Murphy was found unharmed in Kaylee's room, shaking but alive. The small police department, barely 36 officers, was suddenly thrust into a case of national attention. Reporters flooded the town, satellite trucks clogging the narrow roads. Families called the university, demanding updates. Rumors spread faster than facts. Serial killer, stalker, revenge. Police released little, unwilling to compromise evidence. Chief Fry held brief press conferences, his face drawn, his words careful. "We do not believe there is an ongoing threat to the community." But fear had already taken root. Students left campus in droves. Parents drove hundreds of miles to bring them home. By Monday evening, King Road was a maze of flashing lights, while downtown Moscow was eerily empty. At the vigil held that week, candles flickered across the university lawn. Friends stood shoulder to shoulder, whispering the victims' names. For a community that measured crime in noise complaints and parking tickets, the murders felt impossible. Investigators built their timeline backward. They tracked the victims' movements: Kaylee and Madison downtown at the bar, the grub truck stop at 1:41 a.m., the ride home. Xana and Ethan at the fraternity house until 1:45 a.m. Witnesses confirmed the sequence. Digital forensics filled in the blanks: cell tower data, security cameras, and university parking lot feeds. Somewhere inside that mountain of data lay the path of the killer. By the third day, one small clue surfaced: a partial shoe print found on the lower floor, consistent with a Vance-type sole. Above it, near the kitchen, investigators found traces of blood spatter leading toward the sliding glass door. No fingerprints matched any database. But on the knife sheath recovered near Madison Mogen's bed, technicians discovered something new: a single male DNA profile on the snap button. It didn't match anyone in local or federal systems, but it was clean, preserved, waiting for comparison. As the evidence mounted, the department released a crucial public request on December 7th. They were seeking a white 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra seen near the crime scene. The statement was brief, almost understated, but it electrified the investigation. Tips poured in, tens of thousands from across the country. Within days, analysts cross-referenced vehicle registrations at nearby universities. Among them was one belonging to a graduate student at Washington State University in Pullman, just 10 miles west of Moscow. His name was Brian Christopher Kohberger. He was 28 years old, a PhD student in criminology, known by classmates as quiet, intense, meticulous. He drove a white Hyundai Elantra. On paper, it was coincidence. But the deeper investigators looked, the more those coincidences multiplied. Through December, law enforcement kept the town in suspense. They tracked the Elantra's movements via surveillance cameras, cell tower pings, and automatic license plate readers. Each new data point tightened the circle. They learned the car had traveled from Pullman to Moscow 9 times in the weeks before the murders, often late at night. They matched the route to the 3:29 a.m. footage on November 13th. They traced a cell phone that went dark during the window of the killings, reactivating minutes after the Elantra fled the area. Its registered owner, Brian Kohberger. Behind the scenes, agents from the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit began profiling the suspect. He was studying the psychology of crime, fascinated by offender behavior, socially isolated, and living just across the border. For weeks he'd been observed cleaning his car obsessively, wearing gloves to grocery stores, disposing of trash at odd hours. By Christmas, investigators believed they had enough to move. They coordinated with the Pennsylvania State Police, where Kohberger had traveled to spend the holidays with his parents. On December 30th, 2022, at 1:45 a.m., tactical vehicles surrounded a suburban home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Inside, Brian Kohberger was arrested without incident. He wore the same quiet expression seen in his driver's license photo. In the trash outside, agents recovered items containing his father's and his own DNA. When tested, The profile from the trash matched the male DNA from the knife sheath, a statistical probability of 99.9998%. The news broke that morning. After 7 weeks of fear and speculation, Moscow finally had a name. Across Idaho, people stopped what they were doing to read the headline: "Suspect arrested in Idaho murders." In Pullman, neighbors stared at television screens in disbelief. The man they'd seen walking his dog or taking out garbage was suddenly accused of one of the most horrifying crimes in state history. Kohberger waived extradition and was flown back to Idaho under heavy guard. The probable cause affidavit, unsealed shortly after, read like the blueprint of an investigation done in silence and precision. It detailed the DNA link, the phone data, the Elantra footage, the shoe print. It included the testimony of a surviving roommate who, opening her door during the early morning hours, had seen a man in black clothing and a mask walking toward the exit, a glimpse that still haunted her. Every element of the affidavit built a single picture: a calculated crime, a suspect who thought he understood how to hide evidence, and detectives who proved he didn't. As 2023 began, the university resumed classes under new security measures. The victims' names were etched into memorial benches on campus. The house on King Road remained sealed, a physical wound on the hillside. For their families, the arrest brought a kind of relief, but not peace. The trial was yet to come. For the first time since November 13th, Moscow could breathe, even if each breath still hurt. The shadow that had hung over the town now had a shape and a face. But the question everyone whispered remained: why? That question would drive the next chapter: the search for motive, the legal battle ahead, and the long road toward justice. Asterisk Part 3. The shadow and the data. When Brian Christopher Kohberger's name first appeared on investigators' internal briefings, it wasn't a dramatic moment of revelation. It was the quiet result of data converging from half a dozen different systems. Months of digital traces, cell tower hits, license plate readers, surveillance footage had begun to overlap in a single pattern. The shadow that had slipped through Moscow's streets that November night now had coordinates. The trail began with that white Hyundai Elantra. After the murders, detectives combed through hundreds of hours of neighborhood security footage. One camera after another showed the same car circling King Road in the early morning hours, headlights off, slowing near the victim's home before speeding away. The grainy images showed enough to identify the make, year range, and distinguishing marks. Police cross-checked every matching registration within a 90-mile radius. Among them was one at Washington State University in Pullman, registered to a criminology doctoral student named Brian Kohberger. At first glance, it looked routine. A student, 28, pursuing a PhD in criminal justice, teaching assistant for undergraduate classes. But the more analysts looked, the more unnerving the coincidences became. The car's license plate matched one picked up on a traffic camera leaving Moscow just minutes after the murders. Cell tower records later showed a phone belonging to Kohberger traveling the same route, except for one gap. Between 2:47 a.m. and 4:48 a.m., the phone had gone completely dark. That gap corresponded almost exactly to the window of the killings. The data told a story in fragments. In the months before the crime, the same phone had pinged near the victim's house at least 12 times, almost always late at night. The pattern suggested surveillance, or curiosity, or perhaps coincidence, but investigators noted every visit. Then, after the murders, the phone reactivated near the same route back to Pullman. Days later, it pinged repeatedly around the area of the crime scene, as if its user were driving by again. Each new line of data strengthened the connection. Meanwhile, forensic teams in Idaho analyzed the physical evidence. The Kabar-style knife sheath recovered near Madison Mogen's bed carried a single male DNA profile. It didn't match anyone in the National Codes database, but the profile was strong. The Idaho State Lab passed it to the FBI, whose genealogy experts began comparing it to public genealogy datasets. Within weeks, they had a likely family line from Pennsylvania. The surname attached to that lineage, Kohberger, by late December, the investigative puzzle was nearly complete. Agents from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit drafted an affidavit summarizing the evidence: the vehicle, the phone pattern, the DNA lead, and the proximity of Kohberger's residence, just 8 miles from the victim's home. Surveillance teams were deployed in Pullman to watch his movements. They noted his habits, cleaning his car with unusual frequency, wearing gloves to handle trash, late-night drives alone. Every motion was logged. The team's goal wasn't confrontation, it was collection. On December 13th, the semester ended at Washington State University. Kohberger left campus, driving the white Elantra across the country with his father to their family home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. As they traveled, investigators tracked them through toll cameras and license plate readers. The FBI coordinated with Pennsylvania State Police to maintain quiet surveillance. Agents began collecting household trash from the curb, testing it for DNA. On December 27th, a sample from the trash produced a profile belonging to Kohberger's father. The probability that the unknown DNA from the knife sheath had come from his biological son was greater than 99.9998%. 3 days later, in the pre-dawn dark of December 30th, 2022, tactical lights flared outside the Kohberger home. Pennsylvania State Police executed the warrant. Neighbors heard only a brief commotion, the sound of boots on snow, a knock, voices calling his name. Inside, the 28-year-old suspect emerged quietly. Officers took him into custody without incident. In the trash bin outside, more samples awaited testing. In his room, investigators seized computers, a phone, and notebooks. Across the country, Moscow woke to the news. After nearly 7 weeks of fear, an arrest had been made. Chief James Fry, his voice steady but subdued, confirmed it in a short press conference. The suspect is in custody. He thanked the families, the community, and the dozens of agencies that had worked without rest. He gave no opinion on motive, only the simple statement, "The work continues." The probable cause affidavit, unsealed days later, outlined the investigative backbone of the case. It read like a roadmap through modern forensics. Surveillance video showing the Elantra's movements. Cell tower analysis pinpointing the phone's travel pattern. A DNA match from the knife sheath. The account of a surviving roommate who had seen a masked man leaving through the sliding door. The document was cautious, factual, methodical. It didn't claim guilt. It described evidence. When Kohberger was extradited to Idaho in early January 2023, cameras waited at the small Pullman-Moscow regional airport. He arrived in shackles, flanked by troopers, wearing a bulletproof vest. In court that afternoon, he spoke little, responding softly to the judge's questions. The charges were read: 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. He did not enter a plea. The judge ordered him held without bail at the Latah County Jail. For the victims' families, the moment was surreal. They had waited weeks for a name, and now that they had one, the weight of it was almost unbearable. Steve Goncalves told reporters outside the courthouse, "This is the start of something, not the end. We want the truth." Ethan Chapin's mother echoed him quietly, "We trust the process." As the case moved into pretrial proceedings, the legal boundaries tightened. Idaho's strict gag order limited public statements from attorneys and law enforcement. Court filings replaced press conferences. Defense lawyers requested discovery, challenging the sufficiency of the DNA genealogy and the chain of custody. Prosecutors outlined their intention to seek the death penalty, citing the number of victims and the alleged premeditation. Every motion drew national attention. Every hearing filled the courthouse gallery. Behind the spectacle, the investigation's technical story continued to unfold. Digital forensic teams detailed how the suspect's phone had been powered off during the critical window, yet its travel route could still be inferred from later tower connections. Vehicle forensics confirmed microscopic traces linking the Elantra's tires to a distinctive pattern seen in photos from King Road. The FBI's data analysts testified about triangulation, metadata, and the near-forensic precision of modern digital footprints. What had once been invisible was now measurable. At Washington State University, classmates and professors reacted with disbelief. Many recalled him as articulate, even courteous, with a fascination for criminal behavior and research on offender decision-making. Some remembered his classroom questions about how criminals think under pressure. Others recalled nothing unusual at all. In that contrast, the ordinary exterior and the extraordinary allegations lay part of the public's fixation. Through 2023, motions and hearings stretched on. The defense filed to move the trial, arguing that media saturation made impartial jurors impossible in Latah County. The prosecution countered that Idaho law required the case to be tried where the crimes occurred. The judge reserved decision. Meanwhile, forensic labs finalized their DNA reports, and investigators completed digital mapping that reconstructed the night minute by minute for the families. The courtroom became both sanctuary and torment. Each appearance meant facing the man accused of taking everything from them. Yet they came, unfailingly, sitting together in the front rows. When the judge scheduled trial proceedings for 2025, Kaylee's father told reporters, "We can wait. We waited this long. We'll wait for justice." Outside, the house at 1122 King Road still stood, sealed and silent. The university announced plans to demolish it, calling it an act of healing. Some wanted it preserved as evidence until the trial's conclusion. Others wanted it gone. By late 2023, windows were boarded. The driveway empty except for the memorials left by students, flowers, photos, handwritten notes that read, "We remember you." In the digital age, justice moves both faster and slower. Faster, because data leaves trails that light the path investigators once had to guess in darkness. Slower, because each bite must survive the scrutiny of the courtroom. As the legal process advances, Brian Kohberger remains presumed innocent under the law. The charges stand, the evidence awaits its day before a jury, and the families wait with it. When the sun sets over Moscow now, the hills look the same as they always have. Winter returned to the Palouse the same way it always did, quietly, almost tenderly. Snow settled on the brick of the University of Idaho's campus, softening the lines of the clock tower, filling the hollows where candlelight had once burned for 4 students whose names now lived on every lip. Time had moved forward, yet it had not really passed. The case that had frozen an entire college town remained open, heavy with waiting. After the arrest, Moscow tried to remember how to live normally again. Students trickled back for the spring semester. Security patrols increased, lights stayed on longer in dorm windows, and the King Road house remained cordoned off, a silhouette on the hill that no one could ignore. Each time the wind carried through the narrow streets, it seemed to whisper the same unanswered question: when would there be justice? 1. The road to court. Brian Kohberger appeared in Latah County Court for the first time in early 2023. The courtroom was small, lined with polished wood and rows of seats that filled within minutes. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder with victims' relatives. When the defendant entered, flanked by deputies, the only sound was the shuffle of chains. The judge read the charges: 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of burglary. Each charge carried the weight of a life cut short. Kohberger spoke softly, answering the formal questions required of any defendant. The law presumed him innocent. The process would decide everything else. Soon after, the judge imposed a sweeping gag order, restricting public comment from prosecutors, defense attorneys, and law enforcement. It was meant to preserve a fair trial, but it also deepened the mystery. Information stopped flowing outward. Instead, the case moved through the slow, methodical rhythm of motions, hearings, and sealed filings. To the outside world, silence returned. But this time it was the sound of the legal system turning its gears. The prosecution, led by Latah County Prosecutor Bill Thompson, announced its intent to seek the death penalty. It cited statutory aggravating factors, multiple victims, alleged premeditation, and the especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel nature of the killings. The defense, headed by experienced capital case attorney Ian Taylor, countered with motions challenging the sufficiency of the DNA evidence and the legality of the genetic genealogy search that had led investigators to Kohberger's family line. Each filing drew national attention. Every paragraph of legal language became a headline. Through spring and summer 2023, the courtroom filled again and again. At one hearing, the judge ruled that cameras would remain, but under strict limitations. Only pool coverage, no close-ups, no commentary from inside the courtroom. He reminded reporters that trials are not theater. The phrase lingered in headlines, a quiet admonition to a world that had turned tragedy into content. Point 2. The family's long vigil. For the victims' families, court days became markers of time. They sat in the same seats, sometimes together, sometimes separate, always united by the weight of what had been taken. Steve and Kaylee Goncalves, Kaylee's parents, spoke carefully outside the courthouse when they could. "We trust evidence, not rumor." Ben Mogen, Madison's father, told a local paper that he tried to focus on his daughter's laugh instead of the case files. Stacy Chapman, Ethan's mother, wrote publicly that grief has no schedule. The Kernodle family asked simply for privacy. Behind their restraint was exhaustion. They had already lived through the unthinkable: funerals, vigils, the weeks of speculation before the arrest. Now they faced years more of hearings, discovery, and appeals. "It's a second lifetime," one parent said quietly to a reporter after court. The first lifetime ended that night. At the university, remembrance became part of the landscape. For trees were planted near the administration building, one for each student. Their roots took hold through the snowmelt. Memorial scholarships were created in their names: Kaylee and Madison for entrepreneurship and marketing, Xana for hospitality and design, Ethan for recreation management. Freshmen who had never met them now spoke their names as if they were part of the campus itself. Point 3. The digital case. As hearings progressed, the court unsealed selected documents outlining the breadth of the digital investigation. Analysts from the FBI and Idaho State Police described how modern forensics had replaced guesswork with algorithms. They had traced the suspect's car across 20 different cameras, reconstructed cell tower data to within meters, and extracted the DNA profile from the knife sheath with advanced probabilistic genotyping. The filings read like a blueprint of 21st century policing: data as witness, code as testimony. Defense attorneys countered that technology is not infallible. Algorithms can misread, genealogical searches can overreach privacy. The coming trial, legal commentators said, might shape the future boundaries of digital evidence in American courts. But for Moscow residents, the debate was secondary. What mattered was the promise that somewhere inside that evidence lay truth. Point 4. A town still healing. By late 2023, the King Road house stood empty behind plywood and police tape. The university announced plans to demolish it, calling the act a step toward healing. Some students supported the decision, saying they could not bear to walk past it every day. Others argued it should stand until the trial concluded. For months, the debate played out in letters to editors and campus meetings until, in spring 2024, the machinery finally arrived. As the excavator arm rose, a small group of students gathered quietly across the street. When the walls came down, the sound was brief: a single crash that rolled through the valley like a closing door. Where the house once stood, grass was planted, and a sign went up: Vandal Healing Garden, in memory of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan. On warm evenings, people left flowers there, sometimes notes written on notebook paper. One read, "You are remembered every day." 5. The presentus of now, the case remains before the Idaho courts. Koberger has entered a standing plea of not guilty. Pretrial motions continue, and the court has set no final trial date. Each new filing renews the family's patience and the public's interest. The process is slow by design, deliberate, careful, heavy with the responsibility of 4 lives. Reporters who covered the story in its earliest, frantic days now write with restraint. They describe hearings instead of theories, evidence instead of speculation. Moscow has learned to live with both memory and caution. The downtown shops are busy again, but every November, candles reappear on the steps of the administration building. Students who were freshmen in 2022 are seniors now. They speak of resilience and remembrance as if they are part of the curriculum. Point 6. What remains justice in America is measured not in emotion but in procedure, and that procedure continues. Yet beyond the legal language, something more enduring has taken shape. Families who once spoke separately now advocate together for victims' rights and campus safety. Scholarship recipients send thank you letters that end with lines like, "I hope to make them proud." Moscow, once defined by fear, has become a symbol of endurance. The night of November 13th, 2022 will never be forgotten, but it no longer defines the town alone. The community's response, the vigils, the kindness, the refusal to turn tragedy into spectacle has become its own legacy. When spring comes to the Palouse again, the hills bloom with the same green that first drew students here decades ago. The bells in the university tower chime across the valley, echoing over the place where 4 young lives once dreamed of futures now left for others to finish. Their families still attend hearings, still light candles, still believe that one day, In a courtroom filled with truth, the story will finally be told in full. Until then, Moscow waits, steadily, bravely, surrounded by mountains and memory.